Hey there, I'm Will Marshall at Pyramind in San Francisco. Today I'm going to show you some basic tips for getting your head around the sub-bass component of your tracks. Now, sub-bass is a really interesting thing. Typically it's defined as, if we look at EQ8 and open up the waveform display here, you can see, not the waveform display, the frequency display. You can see it's usually defined as this region below around about 100 Hertz, although in the real world it's a little more complicated than that. Now, human hearing technically is kind of officially goes as low as about 20 Hertz, but actually really only goes as low as 30 Hertz in practical situations, and realistically doesn't even work very well at 30 Hertz. In my home studio, I actually have a pair of what are called infra woofers, which are flat down to about 7 Hertz. You know, they produce an even volume all the way down there. And even though it's flat, if I sweep a sine wave down from about 50 or 60 Hertz all the way down to 30 Hertz, my ears just stop hearing it by the time it gets to 30. And you can listen to this. You might not be able to hear this well on headphones, but if you have a good sound system or proper studio monitors, this should be a little bit clearer to you. We're going to sweep this fixed frequency. This is just a sine wave, an operator with a fixed frequency, so I can show you this stuff. And you'll see how the sound fades away as it starts getting low. And a lot of people think when the sound fades away, it's because their PA isn't big enough, or their monitors don't have enough sub or whatever. But even in the situation I have, where definitely the speakers are outputting that volume, I can make the entire apartment building shake if I want to. My ears just can't hear that. So that's a really important thing to realize, is that the functional bottom of the effectively audible sub range is really around kind of 38, 39 Hertz. Once you start getting below that, it loses a lot of energy. Now, if we look at it in the other direction, if we go up, once things start getting above around 60 Hertz, in my experience, maybe above around 65 Hertz, they stop sounding so subby. Like, it doesn't have the same kind of depth and richness that lower frequencies typically have. And this isn't necessarily bad. A lot of music, you don't necessarily want those ultra lows, or you only want them some of the time. But if you're producing any kind of heavy dance music, you typically want the kind of weight and the emphasis of your track to be sitting in that kind of sweet spot, which is, to my ears, around between about 37, 38 Hertz and about 55 Hertz is kind of the range I've come to where I feel that sub is most subby. Below that, it starts to fade out, never go below 30, there's no point. And above that, it's still definitely audible, but it doesn't have kind of the same weight and presence. It's a little bit more high-pitched. So, to give you some context for what this means musically, let's look at this diagram, which is a layout of notes in and their frequencies. So you can see C is either 33 or 65. These are rounded, so this is why the numbers look a little odd. It's just rounded to the nearest, which is all you want. And you can see, if you're thinking about musical ranges that you can effectively play, C is either 33, which is kind of too low for our ears to hear particularly effectively. It's not a great frequency to be hitting if you want a big, heavy sub. Or 65, which is kind of too high to have that feeling of a big, heavy sub. So, not that you shouldn't use C or you shouldn't write tracks in C, but if you're, for example, trying to hit a very heavy dance floor sound, you're going to struggle to get a bass tone that works for you, or a kick tone that works for you that's tuned to C. It's just neither of the options are all that great. And you can see kind of the same problem with C sharp. D around 37 is, to my ears, and as I say, this is all very subjective, but to my ears is kind of the lowest sub note that feels like a genuine sub note to me, D at 37 Hertz. And I don't like to hang out there. What I typically do is hang out a little bit higher than that D, and I drop down to that D to give it a really low feel, and then kind of come back up into slightly higher frequencies, which have just a bit more presence and body. Once you start getting above D, E, you're well into kind of like solid sub territory. So E, F, F sharp G, G sharp A sharp even. These are all like really, really solid subtones that have that thickness. And then once you get up to kind of B and C, again, you have the either too low or too high problem. So if you look at this on a piano keyboard, it basically means that your effective range for sub is between about D and B. That's not playing the correct tone because I have it in a fixed tone mode. Let's try that again. that I want to pull this whole thing down an octave. Once you start getting higher than that, it's more kind of like acoustic bass sounding or whatever. So if we go back to our frequencies, what does this mean for choosing the key that you're going to compose in? Now, obviously, I don't want to say you should only compose in specific keys, because that's rubbish. But if you want a really heavy bass sound, I would stay clear of writing things in C or D. I would stay clear of writing things in B, even A or B flat. And I would kind of focus on the range between about E and A. There's a whole bunch of keys in there. That will give you the heaviest tone you're looking for. Now, when you're writing in these keys, obviously that means your 1, which is especially your kick is typically tuned to your 1 and your bass often comes back to your 1 all the time, is going to be a very heavy tone. That doesn't mean you can't go higher and lower with all the like detail work. You can certainly like have your sub bass bounce up surprisingly high, even a couple of octaves higher, and then drop back that and down. But it means when you hit that 1 is going to have the kind of depth and richness that you're looking for. So this is kind of a subtle little tip, but it's something I've really found. I used to struggle a lot with writing music that had the bass I was looking for, and in the end it was because for whatever reason, I defaulted to writing in C, B, or D just because of my musical theory background, which is what I thought was easiest for me. And so it was a bit of a light bulb aha moment when I realized that other keys would get me better sounding sub bass. So there's one kind of follow-up to this, which is how to think about your sub. People tend to overcomplicate sub-frequencies. They typically put too many in, and they typically overprocess and kind of think about them too much. But if you look in your sub-frequency range, if you go from your C at 33 Hertz, give or take, up to your C here at 66, give or take, there's only one octave there, and then not even another whole octave. So you have like 1.5 octaves in your sub-bass range. So one last thing that's important to think about when you're dealing with sub-bass is that all subtones are essentially just sine waves. If you've done any additive synthesis, you'll know that all sounds are kind of constructed out of sine waves, or if you've studied the basics of subtractive synthesis, you'll know the fundamental tone of a sound is a sine wave plus whatever harmonics or additional things are layered on top of it. And because there's only really an octave and a half of space down here, there's not room to have lots of overtones as part of the sub sound. So literally the simplest and cleanest way of thinking about your sub is as a sine wave extension of whatever is happening higher up in the frequency spectrum. So this dramatically simplifies your understanding of it, because if you want to put a sub underneath any sound, all you need to do is figure out what pitch that sound is and put a sine wave in at that pitch, but sufficiently far down in octaves so that it sits in that kind of sub 100 Hertz territory. Which means any sound at all can be a bass sound just by putting a sine wave underneath it. The one kind of exception to this rule is like an 808 or a hip hop style bass, which is basically a pure sine wave. Pure sine waves are hard to hear. So typically with hip hop bass, the sine wave is actually very gently distorted or has harmonics added to it using a plugin like, say, Waves R-Bass is commonly used to add harmonics. They're very quiet, gentle harmonics, but what they do is they add some high frequency presence that essentially points all the way down to that subtone. So an 808 bass is mostly pure sine wave. There's some very subtle overtones there. Those overtones are really just to make it easier for your ear to hear that there's a sine wave there, because a pure sine wave is so specific as to be almost inaudible sometimes. And also so that laptop speakers and something like that, which can't really play that sine wave, can play the harmonics instead. And then your brain kind of fills in the low end for you, and you imagine essentially the low end that the speakers aren't producing. So that's kind of the only situation in which you need to distort or process sub bass, is when the sub bass does not have any high bass on top of it. In all other situations, the high bass is providing the presence, and the sub bass is just a low extension of it. So there are some rules of thumb and simplicities in dealing with your sub bass. I hope that was helpful, and thank you very much.